The alley was darker than it should have been, and the city noise faded into an eerie silence as Jenna walked along the cracked pavement, her breath visible in the cold night air. She kept her hands deep in the pockets of her worn jacket, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling crawling up her spine, but the footsteps behind her refused to be ignored. They started slow, soft, and careful, like the steps of a predator stalking prey. Her heart beat faster, but she did not turn, not yet. Not because she was afraid, but because she was calculating every second mattered. Every movement could mean the difference between control and chaos. Jenna had been in situations like this before, but tonight something was different. She quickened her pace, and the footsteps followed suit, closing the distance between them. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the walls that seemed to close in around her. She glanced over her shoulder just enough to catch the outline of two figures emerging. From the darkness, they moved with purpose. Their eyes glinted with menace, and their smiles were anything but friendly. Jenna swallowed hard, but her mind raced. She knew what was coming, and she knew there was only one way out. But first, she needed to buy time. The alley twisted sharply ahead, and Jenna veered toward the narrow passage, hoping to use it to her advantage. The men mirrored her move, their voices low and cruel as they exchanged words. She caught fragments of their conversation, threats, and taunts that made her skin crawl. They thought they were in control, that this was their game, and she was just another frightened woman to break. But Jenna was not like most women. She had been trained in places where fear was a tool to be mastered, and pain was nothing more than a signal that she was still fighting. Her breath hitched as one of the men suddenly lunged forward, a fist aimed at her ribs. She barely had time to react. The blow slammed into her side, knocking the air out of her lungs. The world tilted, and she dropped to one knee, coughing, trying to suck in oxygen. But the second man was already there, a boot crashing into her back, sending her sprawling forward. Her hands hit the cold concrete, and for a moment, everything blurred. The pain was sharp and real, but beneath it, something deeper stirred, something fierce and unyielding. The attackers laughed, cruel and triumphant, thinking their prey was broken and vulnerable. They had no idea who Jenna really was. No idea that beneath the battered exterior was a Navy SEAL who had endured worse and come out stronger. She took a shallow breath and willed her body to obey years of training, kicked in muscles, tightening nerves, sparking like electricity through her veins. She pushed herself up despite the ache in her ribs, her eyes locking onto the men with a new intensity that made them pause. They expected her to beg, to fall to the ground and stay there. But Jenna was not about to give them that satisfaction. Instead, she took a deliberate step forward, a silent challenge that made the tallest of the two men sneer and raise his fist again. But before he could strike, Jenna moved faster than they expected. Her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist and twisting with the force of a steel trap. He cried out as the pain exploded through his arm, and his face contorted in shock and fear. The moment of surprise was hers to own, and she took it. The second man tried to intervene, but Jenna was already shifting her weight, using his momentum against him. She sent him crashing into the wall with a brutal force that echoed through the alley and left him crumpled on the ground. The third man hesitated, his bravado slipping as he watched his companions fall so quickly and so decisively. He knew this fight was different than any other, and the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. Jenna stepped closer to him, her breathing steady despite the burning in her side. Her gaze was cold and unyielding like steel forged in fire, and it made the man falter. She whispered words he could barely hear, but they cut deeper than any blade, leaving him trembling and unsure. Jenna knew better than anyone how fear could be weaponized, and she wielded it now with precision. Her attackers were no longer the hunters, but the hunted, and the night held its breath, waiting for what would come next. Suddenly, The distant wail of sirens broke the silence, piercing through the tension like a knife. Jenna turned her head toward the sound. The promise of help and danger mingled in the air. The men glanced around, frantic, their chance to escape slipping away like shadows. At dawn, Jenna did not move after they fled. She stayed rooted to the spot, feeling the ache in her ribs, the burning fire of adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her fingers closed around the small metal tag in her pocket, a reminder of who she was and what she was capable of. She let it dangle, catching the faint glow of the streetlight before slipping it back inside, and stepping into the night alone, leaving behind a silence heavy with unanswered questions and the echo of a warning no one would soon forget. They laughed, thinking they had another easy target. Just another woman alone in the wrong place there. Voices thick with arrogance and the kind of cruelty that made Jenna's skin crawl. But deep inside her, something had shifted, a quiet storm gathering strength beneath the surface that no one could see. The alley was cold and unforgiving, but Jenna's breath was steady despite the ache in her ribs, every inhale a silent promise she was far from defeated. 10 years in the Navy had taught her more than how to fight. She had learned to read the moments between heartbeats, to feel the shifting balance of power in a fight, and to trust her instincts above all else. She pressed her back to the rough brick wall, the cold biting through her jacket, and felt the blood pounding in her temples. Her attackers moved closer, their faces twisted in cruel anticipation, as they believed this would be the end of her. But Jenna had endured worse than fists and fear. She had been forged in fire on battlefields far away from these dirty city streets. Her mind raced through memories of long nights filled with whispered commands and silent drills, the endless repetition that made her body respond without thought. She could still hear the voice of her drill instructor echoing in her mind. Pain means you are still alive. The tallest man lunged forward, his fist cutting through the air like a whip. Jenna sidestepped the blow with practiced ease, her body moving as if it was already on autopilot. The pain in her ribs flared sharply, but she did not hesitate. Instead, she grabbed the man's wrist, twisting sharply until he gasped in shock and dropped his fist. She took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his face. The others froze, unsure how to react to the sudden reversal of roles. They expected a frightened woman, a scream, and a quick end. But Jenna was no victim. She was a warrior. The second man tried to come at her from behind, but Jenna anticipated his move, turning swiftly and catching him by the collar. She used his momentum against him, sending him crashing into the wall with a sound like thunder and a gasp of pain escaping his lips. The third man hesitated, his bravado slipping as he realized he was facing something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Jenna's calm eyes told him everything she was trained to fight, to survive, to win. And she was not about to let them go easily. Her breath was steady now, her body taut like a coiled spring ready to unleash its power. The alley seemed to close in around them. The only sounds the ragged breathing of the men and the distant wail of sirens growing louder by the second. The fear in their eyes was unmistakable, and Jenna could almost taste their desperation. The fight was no longer about survival. It was about sending a message, a warning that some battles were not to be picked with the wrong opponent. She stepped closer, her voice low and steady, a whisper meant to chill and command. The sirens drew nearer, piercing the night, and Jenna knew it was time to decide whether to run or to stand and face what was coming next. The men looked at each other, panic breaking through their earlier confidence. They stumbled backward, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Jenna alone in the alley, her ribs aching and her spirit unbroken. She breathed deeply, savoring the cold air and the sound of approaching help. But she knew this was far from over. The night had tested her and she had passed, but the true fight was just beginning. Jenna reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metal tag, the cool weight grounding her in the present. She let it catch the faint glow of the streetlight, a symbol of who she was and what she had survived. The echo of her attacker's footsteps faded, and the distant sirens grew louder, but Jenna stood still, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of return. She was ready for whatever came next. Her body a weapon honed by years of training, and her mind sharp and focused like never before. The night held its breath, waiting for the storm that was coming, and Jenna was prepared to unleash. The first man swung, and his arm met nothing but air before she locked his wrist and twisted until his scream echoed through the alley. The suddenness of her move caught them all off guard, and the balance of power shifted like a tide, rising unstoppable. Jenna's muscles burned with the strain, yet she held firm, every fiber of her being focused on the task ahead. Years of discipline and unyielding training surged through her veins, turning pain into fuel and fear into cold calculation. The man writhed. Beneath her grip, his face contorted in shock and agony, a sound that echoed the harsh reality of crossing someone who would not be broken. The second man reached for her from behind, but Jenna was already one step ahead, shifting her weight and using his momentum to send him crashing into the wall with a force that cracked through the silence. The impact left him gasping, and slumped her eyes never left the third man, who stood frozen, momentarily paralyzed by the swift, brutal dance unfolding before him. He hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face, as the realization dawned that this fight was no longer theirs to control. Jenna moved closer, her every breath steady, her every muscle taut like a predator sizing up its prey. Her gaze was cold, unflinching, and the sheer intensity of it made the man tremble, as if the very air around her was charged with electricity. She whispered words that cut deeper than any blade, a voice low and steady but filled with authority and warning. The man took a step back, his bravado slipping away, leaving raw fear in its place. The distant sirens grew louder, punctuating the night like a countdown, ticking down to the inevitable end. The attackers knew their time was running out, and panic flickered in their eyes. Yet Jenna did not chase them. She let them retreat into the shadows like leaves, scattered by the wind. Her ribs burned, and her breath came sharp, but her mind was clear, a razor edge of resolve and calm. The cold night air bit at her skin. But Jenna welcomed the sensation, grounding her in the moment, reminding her she was alive and fighting. She touched the small metal tag hanging from her neck, a symbol of her past and her strength. A Navy SEAL not just in name, but in spirit. Someone forged in the crucible of pain, sacrifice, and endless battle. Her attackers had made a grave mistake, underestimating a woman whose silence hid storms, whose scars told stories of survival and victory. Jenna's footsteps echoed as she walked away from the alley, leaving behind a silence heavy with the unspoken warning that she was not someone to be trifled with. The city breathed around her, the distant hum of life continuing, unaware of the storm that had just passed in the shadows. Jenna's mind raced with the implications of what had happened, her instinct screaming that this was not a random attack but something deeper, more calculated. She moved swiftly through the streets, her senses alert, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a clue. She knew the world she lived in was unforgiving, and that her past often caught up with her when she least expected it. As she turned the corner, a sudden noise made her freeze, a subtle shift in the air, a faint whisper of movement. She spun around, her body coiled, ready to strike, but found nothing except the empty street bathed in pale moonlight. The silence was almost deafening, and for a moment Jenna wondered if she had imagined it. But deep down she knew that the fight was far from over, that whatever had set these men on her trail was watching, waiting, calculating. Her fingers brushed the metal tag again, a small comfort in the growing darkness. She kept walking her mind, piecing together fragments of the night, the laughter, the cruel words, the sudden violence, each detail a thread in a larger tapestry woven with danger and deceit. Jenna had learned long ago that survival was not just about physical strength, but about knowing when to fight and when to disappear into the shadows. Until she had answers, she had to stay one step ahead, one breath away from the edge of control and chaos. She reached a quiet cafe where the warm light spilled onto the street and paused for a moment, letting the sound of chatter and clinking cups soothe the raw edges of her nerves. The world inside seemed distant and unreachable, a stark contrast to the harsh reality outside. But Jenna knew she could not linger. The night was a reminder that danger lurked just beyond the glow of comfort, and that her path was one carved from resilience and relentless courage, pulling her coat tighter. She stepped back into the cold air, her eyes scanning the faces around her, every person a possible ally or enemy. She moved with purpose, heading toward a place only a few trusted, a safe house, known to only a handful who understood the stakes and the secrets Jenna carried. Her mind was a fortress built on years of training and trust, and tonight it was her only sanctuary. The night seemed to pulse with possibility, with threat, with the weight of what was yet to come. Jenna's heartbeat matched the rhythm of the city around her, fast and unforgiving. She had faced death and betrayal and pain, and she had survived through sheer will and unbreakable spirit. But tonight the shadows whispered a new kind of danger, a puzzle with pieces still missing, and a storm gathering on the horizon. She paused again at the corner, looking back down the alley, her eyes narrowing as she caught a glimpse of a figure watching from the darkness. Just a shadow, a flicker, but enough to send a chill down her spine. Jenna's body tensed, ready for the chase, for the fight, but instead she turned away, disappearing into the night. Her steps sure, her mind sharp, her soul steeled for whatever awaited, because Jenna was not just a survivor, she was a force no one could silence or break. The sirens began to rise somewhere in the distance, piercing the heavy night air like a haunting cry. Jenna turned her head toward the sound, the promise of approaching danger and hope intertwined in a way that only the night could deliver. Her attackers scattered like leaves caught in a storm, driven by the instinct to survive and the harsh reality that this fight was lost. They vanished into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but the echo of their failure, and the faint scent of fear hanging in the cold air. Jenna's breathing slowed, steady and deliberate, despite the burning ache in her ribs. Each breath a reminder of the battle she had just fought, and the war that was far from over. She did not chase them, for the hunt was not hers to claim, not tonight. Instead, she watched the shadows swallow them one by one, her eyes sharp and unwavering. Her body ached, but her spirit burned brighter than ever, a flame fueled by years of sacrifice and relentless training. Jenna reached into her pocket, fingers brushing against the cool metal of a small tag, a symbol of identity and strength, something that grounded her amidst the chaos. A Navy SEAL, they would remember the name long after the night had swallowed their footsteps and their fear. The city around her was waking, or perhaps it never truly slept, the distant hum of life continuing, unaware of the storm that had passed through these narrow streets. Jenna stood alone, the cold biting through her coat, but she welcomed it. A reminder she was alive, still fighting and still standing. The weight of the night pressed down, but she bore it like armor, hardened by pain and resilience. Her mind raced, thinking of what had led her here, the cruel laughter, the sharp blows, the flash of betrayal lurking behind every corner, and the question that echoed louder than any siren. What did they want from her, and why? Her steps echoed as she moved away from the alley, the sound steady and sure in the silent city. The streets were a maze of shadows and secrets, each one holding a piece of the puzzle. Jenna's instincts screamed that this was not a random attack, but a warning, a message sent in the only language these men knew: violence and fear. Yet Jenna was more than a target. She was a force built to resist and to retaliate, a storm waiting to be unleashed on those who dared cross her path. She paused under a flickering streetlight, the pale glow casting long shadows across her face, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of exhaustion pressing down. But there was no time to rest, no moment to falter. The night was still alive with threats and whispers. Jenna knew that her survival depended not just on strength, but on staying steps ahead of a danger that was closing in with each breath. She touched the metal tag again, drawing courage from its cold surface, and pushed forward into the unknown. As she turned the corner, a sudden movement caught her eye, a shadow slipping between the buildings, watching, waiting. She did not flinch or hesitate. Instead, her body coiled with readiness, a predator sensing the shift in the wind. The figure melted back into the darkness, but Jenna had seen enough, a silent promise that the night held more secrets and dangers than she had imagined. Her mind raced, planning her next move, every instinct screaming that the past was catching up and that the fight was far from over. The city lights blurred as she walked faster, heart pounding, and ribs screaming with each step. But Jenna refused to show weakness. Her years as a Navy SEAL had taught her that pain was temporary and that the true battle was fought in the mind and the soul. She pushed forward, driven by the unyielding need to protect what was hers, to keep, to uncover the truth lurking beneath the surface of this sudden attack, and to make those responsible pay in ways they would never forget. She reached a hidden door tucked away in a quiet street, a place known only to a select few, a sanctuary where she could gather her strength and plan her next move. Inside, the walls were thick, and the air heavy with the scent of old leather and metal, a reminder of battles fought and won. The silence was a balm after the chaos outside, but Jenna knew it was only temporary. A brief pause in a war that was far from over. She sank into a worn leather chair, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled out a small notebook filled with coded notes and names of allies and enemies alike. Every page told a story, every word a piece of the intricate web she navigated in her quest for justice and survival. Jenna's eyes scanned the entries, searching for clues, connections, anything that might explain the violent encounter. Earlier, the pieces were scattered, but she was determined to put them together to find the truth hidden in the shadows. Outside, the night deepened and the city breathed on, unaware of the storm brewing within its heart. Jenna's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and memories, a battlefield as complex as any she had faced in her military career. But this fight was personal, and the stakes were higher than ever. She knew the road ahead would be dangerous, filled with betrayal.